welcome to 2025. How are we doing? I just want to start by saying that I actually had a completely different thing recorded for you to kick off the year. And then January 1st happened, and we had some pretty exciting and unfortunate events happen in New Orleans. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that I lived in New Orleans very recently for the better part of 20 years. And so that experience kind of had me doing a lot of thinking and a lot of reflecting. And I decided I wanted to share a different New Year message with you. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So to kick off, and then we're going to have good stuff because then we're going to talk about everything that's coming in 2025 and things that are super positive. But what I wanted to do was use what happened on New Year's Day as kind of a lesson on how we approach situations, particularly things that are really stressful, emotional, where we don't have all the information immediately available. So in this instance, we now understand it to be a terrorist attack that has happened in the city. But when it first happened, we really didn't have a lot of information. And it was interesting to me to see the spiraling that took place. And I made a point to watch different news channels, both domestic and international, because if you watch international news, you will realize that how we report news in the US is drastically different than how the rest of the world tends to report things. And I just kept seeing some tendencies, some behaviors that were taking place that I know happen in normal day life, in your personal lives, they happen in your professional lives. And I thought we could use this moment as an opportunity to say, if we want to go into 2025 being better, stronger, more aware humans, to be better, stronger, more aware leaders, how can we take some moments to take a moment to reflect on this incident, and then what can we learn to apply going forward? So that is what we're going to do. Hopefully you'll stick with me for this and humor me a little bit, because I think you'll find that there are a couple key elements here that I would love to challenge you on. I challenge myself on this often, and I feel like this is a moment to help level up our leadership, and not only how we lead our teams, but how we lead in our lives. So one of the first things I want to call out is notice where your information is coming from. So I can honestly tell you that, especially early on in the event, that different media sources were reporting very different elements. And depending on who you were watching and what you were listening to, you were likely to start to form a story or a narrative very different from the ones that you might have if you were watching, say, a different channel or getting your information from a different source. And the important part about this is how, in the early moments of any stressful, chaotic event, I like to think back on the days of COVID as well, early pandemic days, talk about really not knowing what was going on. Everyone was looking to Italy to try to get a sense of what was coming, and the things coming out of Italy were not great. Where your source is from are a key component into the picture and the puzzle you're putting together, and have a significant impact on several things. The emotions that you feel, the picture and the narrative that is being painted for you about what is actually happening or not happening. And then also the third one, which is really important, is the actions you ultimately take. So I would challenge you always to notice, where is your information coming from? Am I getting the full story, or am I just hearing pieces from this one person? So if you think about this in the context of an office, if you're only getting your information, say, from your office BFF, but not asking any other questions and not seeking information from any other sources, you're really only getting one person's perspective. And so what we have to challenge ourselves as leaders in the workplace and within our lives is diversifying where our information comes from. Challenge what we know to be, what we think to be true. And that leads me into the second thing is avoid turning assumptions into facts when you don't have information. So let me be the first to tell you that science tells us that when in the lack of information, so when we don't have it all, our brains are desperate to fill in those holes. Desperate. Our brain wants that whole puzzle to be complete. But sometimes in doing that, we take assumptions which are not valid, and those become unintentionally fact. And so what ends up happening is the picture we have painted in front of us, because we don't have diverse sources, we're not challenging the information being received, we're believing blindly, which we've all worked for someone who had a favorite who usually painted a narrative that wasn't complete. We don't want to be those people. So we have to avoid the assumption becoming the truth when we lack fact, when we lack anything that actually shows us what actually is true versus a perception or an assumption. Now, the only way to do that is in the third component, which is how do we choose to stay curious? I'm quoting Ted Lasso. We have to stay curious and ask questions. So when we receive information from any source, even if it's ones that we trust, I mean, think about how many influencers you follow on the various social media platforms that are out there, that when they say it, you believe it to be true because there's some reason there's credibility there. Do you ever say, well, where did their information come from? How do I know it's true? Is it valid? Do you ever go validate it yourself? Most people don't. And so what I would encourage you to do, especially in the age of creative AI, generative AI, people who are selling things but not necessarily being clear of what they're selling, whether it's a narrative or a product, is challenge what you know. Don't outsource your critical thinking. Ask questions. Be curious. Take anything you hear to the next level. Why? Ask the whys. If you're a Six Sigma nerd, 5 whys, go for it. If you don't know what it is, I'll cover that later into something else. But practice 5 whys. How did this happen? How did we get here? And I'm not just talking about massive events, but even cultural breakdowns that happen in our office. How exactly did we get here? Why, when did it happen? When did it start? Were there signs that were missed? Because if you're not curious, if you're not asking the questions, then you cannot understand your role in this. You can't understand were there things, and again, not talking about the big events, but talking about the smaller events in our lives, is what role did we play? Did we? You start there. Was there something I did? Did I miss something? Is there an opportunity to go back and reflect? If we don't slow down and be curious and have self-awareness, we can never show up as a better version of ourselves because we're never having the opportunity to say, I could have done that differently. Notice I said differently, not necessarily better. Differently. Because the last thing I want to talk about, and it ties to the action we take, is understanding where you are emotionally when you are taking action. So when there is chaos, when there is whatever is happening and there needs to be action, it is a very different experience if you are coming from a place of anger, hostility, aggression, versus if you are performing that same exact action from a place of calm, consistency, and strategy. And I want to be very clear about that. You can have the same action be interpreted very differently simply by the emotional state you are in and how you execute that action. So I often think about it, and again, their gender comes into this a great deal because sometimes men, when they come in fired up and angry, they're seen as, look at him, he's passionate. Whereas a woman comes in with the same level of emotion and may be deemed emotional, PMSy, shall we just say it, bitchy, if she showed the exact same emotion. So, what I would encourage you to do is that when it comes time to take an action, based on good information, good reflection, a lot of curiosity, seeking multiple sources, challenging your thought so that we are not making poor decisions. Because the last thing you want to do is make a decision on bad information, because all you're doing is adding more gas to the fire. You're not solving a problem, you're just making the original problem way bigger, right? So if we want to show up as a better version of ourselves in this coming year, I really want you to use this opportunity to think through how you get information, processing that information, challenging the information you have, and then emotionally gut checking yourself. So before you take that next step, emotionally, where are you? Where are you? And do you need to maybe check that temperature a little bit before you actually step out and take any kind of action, make any kind of comments that may damage who you are, your credibility, your reputation? Even if it's the right action, how you execute it matters. And I would say in today's time, it matters even more than it did, say, 10 years ago. You have to think about your audience and you have to think about it. You have to be strategic in how you execute, especially in times of chaos, drama, conflict, insanity, right? So I hope that, again, I just wanted to peel this back a bit just because I found myself sitting there thinking this through and realizing that it's not just applying to a terrorist event, but this applies to how we just consume in a day-to-day basis, how we move through our lives can shift very dramatically if we have bad information, if we make poor choices because we weren't curious enough, because we didn't slow down enough to make sure we understood the full picture, the real picture, not a perceived picture, not a partial picture, but we understood enough that we could take the right action in the right mindset. And then there's the last thing I would leave you with as we're thinking through the better versions of ourselves is to remember kindness costs you nothing. Because usually in moments when emotions run high is usually when people are the shortest, their fuses are short, not a lot of sleep. There's a lot of pressure on leaders to do the right thing, to do something and whatever you do to make sure it is the right thing. So pressure is always high, and to always remember kindness costs nothing to yourself or to others. So don't forget to give that freely if you have the opportunity to do so. So now I'm off. I'll hop off my pedestal. But I just want to say it is an odd way to start a year, and I would like to think that it is not setting a very, setting a tone. But we can choose to own the narrative of this is a moment where we can learn and we can question and we can make smart choices versus, we can figure this out if we so choose to. But what I want to end with today is what's coming in 2025. I am genuinely elated. I can't tell you. At the end of 2024, I had the privilege of networking and meeting some genuinely amazing people who are doing such good work across so many spectrums of industry and geography. And I'm so grateful to say they're going to be on the podcast. And they really genuinely are just some phenomenal folks. Coming up in a couple weeks, you're going to hear from Brent Robertson, which if you don't know who he is, I am so excited I get to introduce him to you. And I just think he's going to start us off on the exact right tone for the year and thinking differently about how we approach leadership and what are some of the most key skills, like listening, which ties to the message I just gave, is how do we listen? How do we really make sure we're present and understanding what's really happening in our businesses and in our lives? So there's still more stuff to come. There's, I'm working on a new program to launch this year, which I'm excited about. There's a lot of writing taking place. Just so good. I'm just so excited for this year, and I refuse to allow the action of one man to change that. And I hope you feel the same, that there is a lot of optimism to be had in this world. And I believe if we approach this world with broader perspective and broader kindness, that we individually, through our small actions, can have tremendous impact. So with that, I will leave you and just say I will see you again soon. First, I just want a quick call to action. If you're not on my newsletter, get on my newsletter because I share everything first there. So if you want to hear about new books, new programs, new offerings, it's always in the newsletter first. So head over to KimberlyJBenoit.com and sign up for it. You can also find links in the bio, and there's links on here. And then I would just say, get in touch with me. If you have questions, if this spoke to you in any way, shape, or form, reach out. I want to hear how you're doing. I want to hear how 2024 ended for you and where you are mentally in heading into 2025. Because I think it takes a village, people. It takes a village. All right, with that, I wish you well. And until next time, take care and be kind to each other.